Partners in Crime. It is great to see you today. I am so excited to welcome Eleanor Kuhns back to Partners in Crime. Welcome, Eleanor.
Thank you for having me.
It's so great to see you today. Now, Eleanor is the 2011 winner of the Minotaur Mystery Writers of America First Novel Prize for A Simple Murder. That is the first book in her Will Reese Shaker mystery series. Her newest book, The Long Shadow of Murder, is the 12th in that series. I can't believe the 12th book. That's so cool. And you've also written a Bronze Age mystery series. You've been a lifelong librarian and transitioned to writing at the start of the pandemic, and we are so thankful for that. And you make your home in upstate New York with your husband and your dog and a myriad of other relatives.
Yes.
Yes. So can you tell us about this newest Will Rees mystery?
Well, it takes place a few months after Murder, Sweet Murder. In that one, they went to Boston because I had a lot of people asking me about Lydia's family. They didn't know very much about Lydia's background. So that was an attempt to address that. But they're back in Maine. And after a winter, uh, Reese has actually been sent on an errand by Lydia, and he gets distracted by Rouge, Constable Rouge, who's kind of a friend and an enemy kind of at the same time, who's looking for a missing man. And so, of course, Reese drops everything to help look, and they do find the man, and that's the start of the mystery because they find him as a dead body.
And it was such a beginning too. I have to ask, this was my first of your Will Reese mysteries that I read. And being the 12th one, I was able to still jump in and read it without any issues whatsoever. How are you able to do that?
Well, I try to put in enough backstory so that you know kind of what happened previously.
Mhm.
That's one thing. But when I started with the idea that every mystery would be a standalone. And I do use a lot of the same characters and have people cycle in and out, but I want the mysteries to stand on their own. But I'm glad that you found that it worked that way because, of course, with the 12th one, Reese has had a lot of history in the past and has done a lot of things. So I'm glad that I was able to communicate his past sufficiently.
Yeah, it was really interesting because, like, you talked about it, but it was like it was a brand new book. Like, I had no problem whatsoever jumping in and just getting to know Reese and Lydia. I love their relationship.
One of the things, this is a kind of a funny story because when I started A Simple Murder, I already had the skeleton in place. I knew that Reese was a weaver. I knew he was estranged from his son. And I knew that the Shakers would play a large part. And they have continually. But Lydia was a surprise. When I was doing research on the Shakers, they never allowed a female Shaker to talk to a man, especially outside the community, without a chaperone. So I made Lydia that chaperone, and she took over. And that was the start of Lydia. And I think when you talk to a lot of writers, you find that sometimes that happens. Something happens that's unexpected, and you just have to go with it. And Lydia was that for me. And I think for a lot of people, they like her better than Will Reese. I do sometimes myself.
I really do like them. I like learning about their life though, and the people that they meet, because they're very involved in their community, and so you pull that into their life and the daily, like, I mean, really, it really is like they're going through their daily life.
Well, I wanted it to be like that. I've always thought that the Sam Spade kind of book, they make it easy in a way. The writer made it easy because there's none of the responsibilities that the rest of us have. We all have jobs, we have families. Will Reese has a farm. You have things to do. So you're trying to add this to a life that's already super busy. And I wanted to to work with that and show here's a man who is super busy with all of his responsibilities, and he gains more of them as he adopts children, has some of his own, things go on, and still wants to be an investigator. I wanted to have that dynamic. So hopefully I achieved that, because I think most of us, that resonates a little bit more with us than the loner, going it alone, with no responsibilities dragging at his heels.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how do you learn about like the communities and like the Shaker community and the community where Will and Lydia and lived?
Well, the Shaker community is based on Sabbath Day Lake, which is the only existing Shaker community that still has two Shakers. When I first did research, they had 11. And one of the two remaining is a recent convert. I think he's in his 50s. And we, I was going up and back to Maine. My mother is a Mainer, and she and my brother, one of my brothers, was suffering a lot of health issues. My husband and I were driving from upstate New York and back again almost every weekend because, of course, we were still working in jobs, And one of those times we stopped at Sabbath Day Lake. Well, because there are living people there, they have a tour guide. It's not like Hancock Village where they have reenactors and you can wander around. So we got the tour guide, and she was the daughter of one of the people who had been adopted by the Shakers many years ago. So she had lots of stories. And so I went back to the Shaker, the little bookstore that they had, and I bought a copy of every book. And from then on, I visited all the Shaker communities because they had a lot of material that is not available through Amazon or anything else. And I started doing a lot of research. And of course, if you sign up with Sabbath Day Lake, you can use their own little library, which used to be the schoolhouse. And they have all kinds of data on how much money they made selling herbs and all of that. So I really had to do a deep dive into the Shaker life to learn about the Shakers. But I did, and fortunately, even in the wider world, there's quite a bit written about them. So I should turn around the computer and show you the stack of books I have. I have an entire bookcase devoted to the Shakers.
I can imagine. Wow.
Yeah,
So,
it's really something. But the Lydia and the lives of the women, that was much, much harder. Um, I think it's true that most of the since most of the books for many years and most of the archaeologists were men and all of that, there wasn't a lot written about the lives of women. So that was a struggle. I had to read a lot of biographies and kind of try to piece together what the life of a woman would be in that time. It wasn't easy, and I mean even cookbooks. There was one cookbook published in the late 1700s, and the one of the recipes starts with "Go down to the pond and collect two turtles," and goes on from there. Yeah, so that part was tough.
oh, I can imagine. What is some of the interesting stories that you've learned, though?
Well, you know, one of the things is most people, when I've talked about the Shakers, say, oh, I only knew that they made furniture. Well, of course, the furniture was an outgrowth of their philosophy. Hands to work, you're showing your devotion to God. A lot of people don't know they were celibate, so they had to adopt children to keep their numbers up. But that was a good thing because in Cradle to Grave, I talk about if you're an orphan, and you didn't live near the Shakers who could adopt you, boy, your life was probably nasty, brutish, and short. So it was tough. So but the Shakers had their own things. Like one of the big flaps, a little after the time I write about, was called the Great Divorce, where a woman wanted to join the Shakers and her husband didn't, and she wanted to take the children and he didn't want her to, and it was a huge case. And lots of fighting back and forth, you know. So the Shakers, you know, at that time were also viewed suspiciously because they did not live the way they were supposed to. You know, the nuclear family, the man is in charge. That was the other thing with the Shakers. Women had equal power in governing. Um, so, you know, it was really interesting. And of course, they had people like Hans Bergen who thought that they had people dancing naked and all of that. All of these theories were out there. But there were, you know, they it was a really kind of interesting thing. And the Shakers were not static. They had phases too, where one time they all smoked tobacco, and then another time they didn't, and then they all drank, and then they were all teetotalers. I mean, so it was a changing and evolving community.
Mhm.
So, but very fascinating. And they managed to keep going until 1966 when the United States actually passed a law that they couldn't adopt children anymore, which I think is unfortunate. And the reasoning was because it wasn't a nuclear family.
Wow.
Yeah, 1966. Pretty
Wow.
recent.
Yeah. And
But
so
I mean,
impactful for so many.
and when they started, there were no orphanages really, no workhouses. I mean, there were workhouses, but where people would die rather than go in there. There was really nothing for children. There was no social network at all. So if you were a widow and your son threw you out because he had inherited the entire farm, you know, you were on the road unless you could make it to the Shakers, and they would take you in. And the kids especially, they would take you in, they would train you, they would teach you to read and write. So even if you chose not to join the Shakers, they gave you the skills you needed to continue living.
Now, were there a lot of these communities?
There were quite a few. uh, I've mentioned Hancock Village. There was Canterbury in New Hampshire, Shaker Heights, that was originally a Shaker community. There were even Shaker communities in Georgia. They didn't last that long though because their style wasn't really didn't really fit the South, you know. But they did start a couple of communities in the South, and they were all over the Northeast. And Sabbath Day Lake, interestingly enough, was the smallest and poorest, and that's still going, and the others are gone.
That's
Yeah,
crazy. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
yeah. Very fascinating. And it was probably the most successful commune because, in essence, that's what it was ever. And certainly the most successful in this country.
And they didn't really allow outsiders to hang out unless, they
Well,
were
they originally they did because they were hoping to get converts. But they soon realized that the people who came to watch their services, because, you know, Shakers, shaking Quakers, they were very evangelical, you know, um, were coming to view them as entertainment. So then they shut that down. Um, but they actually were pretty involved in their communities. I mean, they brought baskets out at Christmas time and tried to keep an eye on children who might need help and, you know, that kind of thing. And some parents who couldn't afford to keep their kids would apprentice their children to the Shakers. They had contracts at the New York State Museum in Albany.
really.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet that was amazing to see.
Yeah, pretty fascinating.
And now you alluded to it, but in your story, you talk about the women dancing naked. Now, where does stuff like this come from, and how did you find out about it?
Well, you know, when I'm doing all this research, that was one of the things that was mentioned, that there were all kinds of rumors about the Shakers because they were viewed suspiciously, as I mentioned, because they lived differently. They were different. And a lot of people thought that it was against God's will that the women had that much power, you know, that they shared the governing and that they were celibate. So they had a lot of rumors, and that was one of the most salacious. But there were many, many, many of that sort. That they danced naked, that they were really Satanists. All of this. And when Mother Ann Lee, who was uh, the the visionary, if you will, of the Shakers, uh, tried to drive from Lebanon to through New York, she was met with catcalls and harassment and physical attacks and everything. They were different. So
Yeah.
and so almost anything that people could think they did that was bad was ascribed to them.
It's funny in talking about this and how the Shakers were different. It brings to mind Lydia and how she's not a typical wife in that time period.
Right.
She's very much more outspoken, and she and Reese are partners,
Yes.
more than would have been the case for most women at that time.
I think, well, if you when you read Murder, Sweet Murder, you see that she's estranged from her family for a lot of good reasons. So you know already that she was fairly strong-willed. And when she joined the Shakers, of course, now she's in an environment where women are, I mean, it was a very top-down organization, but women were allowed to have the same amount of power as the men. So when she met Reese, she already had changed her expectations. And I don't think she ever expected to be married. I think she expected to be kind of attached to the Shakers, although she'd been excommunicated at that point, forever. So it was a surprise for both of them, really. And she is
Yeah.
a partner, and there are a lot of times when she doesn't let Reese get away with anything. And of course, in the long shadow of murder, she's the one who really figures it out. And she tells him right in front of everyone, no, you're wrong.
Husbands love that. So, in addition to Will Reese and the Shaker Mysteries, you also have written an ancient Crete mystery series. Um, so, can you tell us what brought you back from the ancient Crete back to Will Reese?
Well, I felt that I hadn't finished the story. And I'm not sure I finished it even now. I mean, I'm thinking that there are a couple of more things that I want to explore. And, I hesitated because the Bronze Age Crete was so different, you know. And I'm thinking actually of a different time period entirely, 1930s in Yonkers, New York, where I grew up, Dutch Schultz and the lot. But I felt that I hadn't really finished the trajectory, because in the Sweet Murder, one of the reasons they're in Boston is not just because Lydia's father has been accused of murder, but because Jerusha, who's the oldest of the adopted children, wants to become a teacher. And they're looking for a school for her to go to learn, because she's basically gone through a dame school and knows basic reading and writing, but she doesn't know any of the things she's going to need if she's going to go on. So she has to go to a better school, even though Reese doesn't want to lose her. Um, that's why one of the things they're doing in Boston, and we haven't finished her story, really.
Yeah, it's interesting to see each of them. And yeah, I'd love to get to know, especially her better.
I have decided though there was the first real school for girls was in Litchfield, Connecticut, and I'm thinking that I'm going to send her there. And I think I mentioned it in The Long Shadow of Murder because Cordelia, Lydia's sister, is being sent there. So I'm sure that they can get to all kinds of mischief together.
I can imagine. This could be so much fun. I can't wait. Now, this book is slightly different because you self-published it as opposed to going with a traditional publisher.
I
So
did.
what are, yeah, so what are some of the things you learned doing it this way?
Well, I miss having an editor. That's the first big one because I don't really have problems with grammar or spelling or anything like that, but editors pick up, all the little holes in the plot. Maybe you didn't explain something carefully. Maybe this would be a better way to go. Maybe you need more of an explanation here. Maybe you need to tweak the plot. So you don't have that when you're self-publishing. And I miss that tremendously because I suddenly realized how much I relied on my editors to give me feedback. On the other hand, there's nothing about really having the control over what the cover looks like, how long it's going to be, when you're putting it out, can you do, how many giveaways you have, whether you can give it away as a digital copy. I mean, all of that suddenly opens up to you.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow. So how did you choose your cover?
Well, it's funny because I thought the covers would be the hardest part.
Yeah.
But actually, when I started thinking about the story, it just came to me because it's the long shadow of murder. It touches back to something in the Revolutionary War. That's part of the theme that I wanted to explore. So it made sense to have a Revolutionary War soldier on the cover. But I didn't want him to be facing forward. I wanted him to be facing backward, kind of looking backward to the past and what happened there. So the cover actually turned out to be part of the easiest process, So we'll see if that's true when if I do the third Bronze Age Crete. I suspect that won't be so true, but we'll find out.
I loved your cover. It's very representative of the book.
Yes, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Because
Oh,
um,
absolutely.
because there are parts of Reese that I don't think I've fully explored. I touch on them occasionally, but in
Mhm.
this one, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that happened during the Revolutionary War when he and Ephraim, of course, another character, were very young and were at war.
Yeah, you bring a lot of emotion into his character in this particular book.
Hmm. Well, I think too that, when I first started writing it as a series, my plan was, or my subtitle that I used only in my head was the growing up of Will Reese, because he starts at a very different place. He really is estranged from his oldest son, and it takes a long time for them to come back together.
Mhm.
And he doesn't really think he's ever going to be married again. He's a traveler. He's estranged actually from a lot of people, his sister among them. And by the long shadow of murder, he's married. He has two children of his own. He's adopted a number of children. That happened in Cradle to Grave. And he's become a very different personality, a very different man. He still has his desire to have justice and he can still have a temper. But Lydia and the family have mellowed him and they've made him grow up and become someone different. And so his story arc really started in a very different place. And he really is a pretty much different character than he was.
So, okay, but what about Rogue? He's
What
he's
if,
very abrupt.
yes, yes. You mean Rouge?
Yeah.
Yes. Um, yes. Because I mean, he's another character I didn't expect to be a continuing character. I thought he was going to be a one-off, and then it went on, and he and Reese have kind of a friendship, but it has its conflicts because Rouge is the constable, and he's very careful of his status. He wants Reese to respect his status. Well, Reese doesn't always, and Reese is in a lot of ways smarter than Rouge and is willing to give people a chance. And he also, thanks to Lydia, is very conscious of the fact that women can see and tell. And Rouge never even thinks to question them, because they're women. So, but Rouge too has changed. And that happened in Murder on Principle when they had this was written at the beginning of the pandemic. Can you tell? They have an epidemic of smallpox, which was extremely common, and George Washington was very ahead of the curve because he made all the Revolutionary soldiers get vaccinated. And it wasn't the way we think of it, it was the cowpox vaccination. It was a live cowpox vaccination. So, but smallpox was really, really dreaded at that point. It had a 30% death rate, and people like Rouge get scarred, and a lot of people went blind, and had a lot of serious effects. So that changes him because he realizes he doesn't want to die alone. So I like the fact that Rouge and Reese, while they're friends, are also at loggerheads a number of times because I think that's realistic. You don't agree with your friends all the time, and sometimes they act stupid, and you have to tell them. And Reese never holds back with Rouge, and Rouge doesn't always hold back with Reese either, for that matter. So, yeah.
Yeah, I loved their different interrogation styles and like how they spoke to witnesses and Grace is like, yeah, I can't let him go in there by himself.
Yeah, because Rouge is kind of I mean, he runs a tavern. He's a very rough and ready kind of guy. And Reese is a weaver, so he's had contact with all different kinds of people, a lot of women. So he's learned to moderate himself a bit.
Yeah. Well, so tell us, what is on your scope of work coming up next? Are we going to get more Will Reese or maybe some ancient Crete
Well,
or?
I think I'm going to do another Crete. And I do have an idea for actually two more Will Reeses. One is I kind of would like to do something with the school in Litchfield and Jerusa and Cordelia. And I would like to do Will Reese. I'm thinking of titling it Will Reese's Last Case in the year without a summer, 1816, where I don't know if you know about it, but a volcano erupted in Indonesia, I think. And that year it was cold and rainy. They had snow in July. The crops failed all over the world, Europe and this country, everything. I mean, all kinds of things happened because the volcano threw smoke and ash into the atmosphere, no sunlight, and it changed the climate for that summer. And it was really something because there were all kinds of conspiracy theories. That's what we call them now, but at that time they didn't call them that. But that's what they were about what happened, and you know, a lot of religion, well, preachers anyway, came out and said it was God's punishment because people were sinful, just whatever you can imagine. So I would like to do something during that period too. So
Oh, that would be amazing. That sounds so good. I love the history of the things that actually happened and pulling that into fiction.
yeah, I do too. And I think a good historical fiction writer should always be as accurate as possible. And if they're not, they should let you know that they put this in maybe a few, like the wagon. I talk in the author's notes that the wagon that Reese is looking at for his huge brood of kids was actually not invented for a few more years. But I thought it, could have at least been discussed at that point. So I think you should try to be as accurate as possible because sometimes this is people's only connection to some of this history.
Mhm.
And even
Especially the shaker stuff, because it would be hard to research.
yes, well, come to my house. You can look at my library. But yes, but I will say they have been pretty accommodating, the Shakers, at trying to maintain the understanding of their community. And when um, the elder was alive, a number of years ago. I mean, he went to Lebanon to help them reconstruct the barn so that it was correct. So they have shown interest in maintaining information about themselves, which is very helpful.
That's
But
wonderful.
it was much harder to do the research for Bronze Age Crete because that was a pre-literate society, and I had to rely on archaeological journals and magazines and digs. And of course, archaeologists don't agree with one another. So I had to decide, well, which theory am I going with? So, but with the Shakers and Will Reese, and there's newspapers. New York has historical newspapers. I could even get historical Maine newspapers from that period. So, I mean, yeah, it's the research is a lot easier with the written word.
I can imagine. And you work in a library as well, or
I do.
did? Yeah.
Yes, I did. Now I'm there very, very part-time, but I like to keep my hand in. But I think I have never met a librarian yet who just doesn't look everything up just to be on the safe side to find out what's happening and whether this is accurate. That's how
Oh,
you're trained, really.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's so great to chat with you again.
Well,
And
thanks for
partners in crime, you need to check out The Long Shadow of Murder and the rest of the Will Shaker series, and of course, Eleanor's wonderful Ancient Crete series. So welcome, and we will see you again soon.